Hello and welcome to Politics London. Coming up, with the future of the Royal Albert Dock development hanging in the balance, just why are such regeneration schemes so hard to deliver?
To get a big development off the ground in London, you really need good luck. You need a lot of luck, and actually this development's had some really bad luck.
Good morning. Great to have you with us for the programme. Hello and welcome. I'm Samantha Simmons. I'm joined for the duration of the show by Dr Rupa Huq, Labour MP for Ealing Central and Acton, and by Sir Bob Neal, Conservative MP for Bromley and Chislehurst, who is chair of the Justice Select Committee. And as ever, if you'd like to join in the conversation at home, do follow us at BBC London News. Now, I want to start with the events of Thursday and the resignation of the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Dame Cressida Dick.
Following contact with the Mayor of London today, it is quite clear that the Mayor no longer has sufficient confidence in my leadership of the Metropolitan Police Service for me to continue as Commissioner. He has left me no choice but to step aside. I say this with deep sadness and regret.
While her resignation came just 6 months after her tenure as Commissioner had been extended for 2 years by the Home Secretary and the Mayor. But the Met has been rocked by a series of scandals in recent times. And this week, the Mayor put the police chief on notice following a report into Charing Cross Police Station that revealed racism, sexism, homophobia, bullying, discrimination and misogyny. Lauren Moss sent this report as the story broke.
The day started with fighting talk. After being put on notice by the Mayor, Dame Cressida Dick faced Londoners live on the radio.
Is it time for root and branch reform at the Met? And will you now go?
I have been working as hard as I can. I have a very, very good and extremely positive top team. I think about my leadership all the time. I'm not an arrogant person. I do adapt. I do change. I have absolutely done my very, very, very best, and I will continue to do so till the day I finish as Commissioner.
And that finish was announced in a complete turnaround just 8 hours later, with the Commissioner saying Sadiq Khan's left her with no choice but to step aside, as he no longer has the confidence in her to continue. It's something he made clear tonight, following months of devastating headlines for the Met.
To rebuild the trust and confidence of Londoners in the Met, and to root out the racism, sexism, homophobia, bullying, discrimination and misogyny that still exists. I am not satisfied with the Commissioner's response.
It's beyond my wildest dreams, an extraordinary privilege.
She spent 40 years in policing, and it's almost 5 years to the day since she was appointed Commissioner. Now Dame Cressida Dick has bowed to pressure after being forced to apologise time and time again for the actions of officers.
I am so sorry.
The force was rocked 11 months ago after the murder of Sarah Everard by then-serving police officer Wayne Couzens. In December, an inquest jury found failings in the investigations into the deaths of 4 gay men in Barking. Finally, last week, the final straw, a string of offensive messages sent between some officers at Charing Cross Police Station 4 years ago emerged, among them WhatsApps about hitting women. Tonight, her resignation is splitting opinion among Londoners who've worked alongside her and spoken out against her.
I'm glad that she's finally gone because I think it allows the Met Police to begin a new chapter, hopefully, where they acknowledge the problem of institutional misogyny, racism, classism, scandal and corruption in the force and tackle it head on.
Personally, I actually really like Dame Cressida Dick, but the question would be, who can rebuild that level of trust between disadvantaged or many communities and the Met? Who could rebuild that trust? And it just seems and it appears like the trust has been broken on many levels.
During the work of Cressida, there has been tangible changes which have geared positively.
Cressida Dick will stay on for a short period while a new commissioner is found, but she was visibly moved tonight at the end of the road.
Undertaking this role a Crown appointment as a servant of the people of London and the United Kingdom has been the greatest honour and privilege of my life.
The appointment of the next commissioner will be made by the Home Secretary, who, along with the Mayor, thanked Dame Cressida Dick for her service.
Lauren Moss with that report there. Well, Rupert, you called for Cressida Dick's resignation back on this show in October. You must feel vindicated now.
I mean, look, it's a sad end to a 40-year career of public service, isn't it? But it just felt that by the end she was someone known for apologising all the time. And since, I think, the list of things that time I was on in October, there have been more. The disgusting tales of what came out of Charing Cross police station and the Stephen Port murders. That's 4 people, at least 3 of whom would have been alive today had there not been this bungling incompetence and this idea that gay lives don't matter. And, you know, racism, sexism, homophobia, that's a lot of Londoners that implicates if we're talking about BME communities, women, and LGBT communities. So, look, maybe this was kind of one scandal too many. She turned out to be someone, you know, there was great promise at the beginning, the first woman in post, the first LGBT person. But I think fresh leadership is needed, really. It would send a strong signal. And obviously the Met Police has got a lot of problems. Someone's head on a plate isn't going to magically make all those go away. So things like training, recruitment and retention, standards when you're in post, because some of these things, WhatsApp, I mean, the WhatsApp messages, maybe there are rules in place for those kind of things that have happened since the rule book was written.
Bob, one crisis too many, or given that there has been crisis after crisis for Cressida Dick and the Met for months now, should the Home Secretary have dealt with this situation much sooner?
Well, there's no doubt there have been serious problems in the Met, and I've been very critical of those in the past, though equally the vast majority of our police officers in London do a fantastic job for the vast majority of the time. But the failings there have been. However, there are 3 points, it seems to me, to make. Whilst there are failings which can be laid at the door of Cressida Dick, the Commissioner has operational control of the Metropolitan Police, but the policies and strategies are set by the Mayor. So the Mayor can't escape responsibility himself for his share of what's gone wrong. There's a joint responsibility here, and simply making the Commissioner the sole scapegoat isn't, I think, the answer. Second point, the way in which the Mayor has handled it is not, I think, either helpful or proper. As you say, this is a joint appointment with the Home Secretary. Only 6 months ago, the Mayor was perfectly happy for her to continue. Now, if he had had reason to change his mind, then the proper course would have been to have sought an urgent meeting with the Home Secretary, to have discussed that privately with her, and then come to a joint position. That might have been the same one. But as it was, he in effect put the Commissioner's arm up her back, cornered her, and preempted the role of the Home Secretary. And the Home Secretary's role is important because, of course, the Met, as well as being London's police force, also leads on counter-terrorism for the whole country. It also deals with diplomatic VIP protection, the capital city element. So frankly, he's not handled it in the correct way. And the third problem is, because of that, I'm concerned that we'll have a difficulty in recruiting a good person to succeed her. If you think that you're going to be ambushed by the Met and hung out by the Mayor and hung out to dry, how many really top police officers are going to take that risks? So there were problems. It may have been the right thing to have ended up with, but it's been badly handled by the Mayor, and he can't simply wash his hands of all of the responsibility.
Rupert, badly handled by Sadiq Khan. He has, after all, not consulted the Home Secretary, and now the Met is left rudderless.
Well, again, we need sort of clearer lines of communication because it's an unusual position in London. We don't have a PCC, Police and Crime Commissioner, so we've got this strange relationship between the Home Secretary and the Mayor. But ultimately, in this country, we have policing by consent. And also all the polling shows that trust and confidence in the Met Police, even to handle the Downing Street investigations, I think the latest YouGov stuff on will this be genuinely independent, it seems to have gone amongst Londoners. So, and it just seemed that interview, people used to say a week is a long time in politics. Gosh, things change by the half hour nowadays, don't they? So the interview of the Thursday morning compared to the position on Thursday night, she did seem a bit tin-eared. Again, after the Stephen Port murder, she was denying that there's homophobia in the ranks. I just think, I don't know, we are where we are. It's done now. And Bob makes a good point that we need to make sure that the right person comes forward now, because I understand that the reappointment in the autumn was partly because there was no obvious successor. So we need to be, so I don't know if that was a case of, for fear of worse, cling to nurse, but we need to make sure that there is someone that has not just, because she was apparently the copper's copper, that not just the trust of the rank and file police officers, but of Londoners as well.
Bob, how do you think this departure will impact on the Partygate investigations now, given that she's not going anywhere for the foreseeable future until a replacement is found, and that could prove, as we've just been hearing, extremely difficult?
Well, it shouldn't, and I hope it won't. Obviously, it doesn't help that with a sensitive investigation of that kind, the Met is effectively rudderless, and she's sort of a lame duck commissioner. But it shouldn't, and it's very important that that is concluded as swiftly as possible, but with complete professionalism and impartiality. What we don't want, I think, is any needless delay. That's not in anybody's interest.
Bob, it's all about moving forward now and reforming of the Met. Bob, as chair of the Justice Select Committee, what's your one big idea of how it is reformed?
What I think we do need to think about is whether or not it is still practical to have this dual function that the Met carries out. That's to say, the national functions as well as the policing London functions. That does create a tension. It's worked OK to start with, but we've now had 4 commissioners who've departed prematurely. And if the mayor, any mayor, doesn't matter what party, isn't prepared to work through the system with the Home Secretary, that creates tensions. So I think we need to perhaps look about that. And I think we should also be beefing up the scrutiny powers of the London Assembly and involving the London boroughs much more in scrutiny, because one of our concerns we've had in areas like mine is too much of the mayor's strategy has focused upon inner London and not enough upon the outer London boroughs. So those are reforms that we could make.
OK, Bob, thank you. Now, the transformation of the Royal Albert Dock in East London was supposed to create thousands of jobs and bring much-needed regeneration to the area. But in 9 years, the project hasn't made much progress. In 2013, the then Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, awarded the contract to Chinese developers ABP. And now their chairman has told this programme they're still committed to the project, but due to financial problems, is seeking help from elsewhere. Last week, the Greater London Authority confirmed that a final termination notice had been served on ABP because of the delays. Helen Drew explains.
London's royal docks date back to the 1800s and were at the centre of the British Empire's trading network. Gradually, their use declined and they closed in the 1980s. They're in Newham in East London, and one of those docks is the Royal Albert Dock, which is opposite City Airport and next to the Excel Centre. When Boris Johnson was Mayor of London, he had a plan to turn it into London's 3rd financial district.
There's going to be 20,000 jobs in a part of the city that, was basically deserted for years and years and years.
Fast forward nearly a decade and the site is still basically deserted. It's a 35-acre site and there have been some offices built, but there's also supposed to be homes, retail and leisure.
The offices were finished in 2019 and today appear completely empty. The Greater London Authority says there's been no significant activity since their construction and they want action.
This today is a ghost town, as you can see. Just looking behind me, this project, the ABP project, was described by the developer as being the jewel in the crown of the Royal Docks, only if. This is London's only enterprise zone, but this part of the enterprise zone, quite frankly, is disaster zone. This is the area of London that's crying out for jobs, for investment, for housing, and then local people, my constituents, are bitterly disappointed by the lack of progress on this side.
The developer responsible for that lack of progress is ABP, who Boris Johnson awarded the contract to in 2013. The chairman is a prominent Chinese businessman who in a statement has told Politics London they've since been hit by factors out of their control, including Brexit and COVID. Xu Weiping said that positive discussions are ongoing with several interested parties. He said they maintain that the outlook for the Royal Albert Dock project remains strong. Those who know the area say it would be a huge benefit.
It's very quiet. I mean, this where we are right now near the Excel, it's neither residential nor commercial in my view. It's kind of in between.
How would you describe this area at the moment?
In transition.
It will be amazing if we had more financial related jobs close to where I'm living now, or more close to this area, yeah. And with the Crossrail extension, I think it will be amazing, yeah.
Big schemes like this often struggle.
Whatever the merits of the original proposal, to get a big development off the ground in London, you really need good luck. You need a lot of luck. And actually this development's had some really bad luck. It's not unusual at all. I mean, if you look at Canary Wharf, there were several bankruptcies on the way to getting Canary Wharf built out. I could count on the fingers of two hands the number of schemes for Battersea Power Station that came and went before the things that are happening are actually happening there. So it is tough, and you do need to be able to last through several decades, several economic cycles to get these things to happen in London.
The Greater London Authority has given the developer until April to clarify whether they can turn this area into London's next business district or not.
Well, Bob, this was supposed to be a multi-billion-pound scheme that would regenerate that area, bringing in 30,000 jobs. That community's been really let down, haven't they?
It's very disappointing, isn't it? Because it was a great scheme and a very worthwhile scheme, and Boris Johnson, when he was mayor, was right to seek to go ahead with it. I think there is an element of commercial delays and misfortunes. Before I moved down to Bromley, I used to live very close to Canary Wharf, and that did have an awful lot of stops and starts, if you remember the history of it and the timing. Now that said, as you heard, I mean, phase one actually was delivered, though a lot of office occupancy has been badly hit in London. The problem has been thereafter, which includes the houses. So obviously we want to get it moving, but I'm afraid it's a little bit like the Cressida Dick situation. The mayor's very quick to point the blame at other people, but what he doesn't talk about is that that's part of the wider Royal Docks regeneration project, and that includes, for example, moving City Hall down to the Crystal, which is already delayed and over budget and not fit for purpose. That's nothing to do with this particular company.
They have moved down. They have moved down there now.
We've got the delays on the old Oak, Royal Development Corporation. That's nothing to do with this either. So he's got a bit of a history of things going wrong on his watch, and then he's very quick to blame others. It is unfortunate. There may be more than one reason behind all of this, but we shouldn't just assume that it's the right thing for the mayor to say, oh, it's just all down to the developer.
Rupert, the GLA has served a termination notice now on the developer, but it's been 9 years. Shouldn't there be a stronger oversight of these big infrastructure projects?
I mean, look, this is the wrong side of London for me. I don't have detailed knowledge of it. You're right that City Hall has moved there already. So that was meant to kickstart this area. It was meant to be an alternative financial centre to the city. But to me, it looks like just another of these Boris Johnson vanity projects where, you know, he's been sold some magic beans and the beanstalk never quite materialised. How many of these have we got? The cable car, which, you know, hardly anyone uses. The figures are really grim on that. The water cannon, the garden bridge, that was tons and tons of public money that never materialised at all. And just the parallel I can see in West London, Bob mentioned it actually, is the OPDC, Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. That was meant to be a super development opportunity area, kind of on the scrubland where Wormwood Scrubs is. That was meant to be 25,500 new homes, 65,000 jobs, again, signed off by Boris Johnson in his term as mayor. None of those have materialised yet. We are getting a new HS2 station, but again, we don't even have a guarantee of funding that the station will run because we've got an anti-London government. So, you know, he signed these off when he was London mayor, but now he's not giving the money to make them happen.
We must leave it there. I'm sure we'll have plenty more on this, though, another time. Thank you. Now, though, to the Vagrancy Act. It is a 200-year-old piece of legislation that criminalises rough sleepers simply for bedding down on the pavement. It uses words like rogues and vagabonds and predates the formation even of the police. The Lords recently voted to scrap the Act at the third reading of the government's police and crime bill. There is now cross-party support in London for repealing the Act, but one last vote in the Commons will determine its fate. Jessica Ewer spoke to the homeless charity Crisis.
So the Vagrancy Act is a piece of law from 1824
that means that people who are sleeping rough or begging are arrested, and they're, if they're convicted, they're issued with a fine, or they may end up with a criminal record. And really is the most archaic and cruel legislation you can imagine, punishing people for destitution and homelessness. The Vagrancy Act is definitely used in London, so the Metropolitan Police are one of the highest users of it. Tonight there will be people that are affected by use of the Vagrancy Act. It doesn't even have to be formal. It can be used as a threat to move people on, and that happens, you know, in the thousands across the capital. The Vagrancy Act has been repealed through the amendments to the policing bill in the House of Lords, and we also have a large number of Conservatives like Nikki Aitken, like Bob Blackman, like Robert Jenrick and others, who are behind the scenes working really hard to make sure their colleagues understand this is a real opportunity to do something much needed. So when it comes back to the House of Commons, there's a lot of power, there's a lot of passion behind this issue, and lots of people prepared to say to their own government, if you don't do the right thing, we might need to disagree with you on this one.
Bob, doing the right thing, is it long overdue, the repealing of this act?
Yes, it is, and I've been supporting the representations that Nikki and Bob Blackman and others have made to ministers, and I shall certainly be voting in favour of its repeal. And I very much hope actually that ministers will agree and in fact accept those Lords amendments. That's the best possible objective. You know, this goes back to, as you heard, the 1820s. This is going back to the time when we had children going up chimneys, and we understand and have moved on a huge amount in the way in which we deal with homelessness now, and you know, government programmes and London government programmes have done a lot more to deal with rough sleepers, to deal with homelessness, and there are real underlying problems. You know, often mental health issues, are often addiction problems of one kind or another, and using the Vagrancy Act is really not the right way to be dealing with that in a modern society. There's major public health issues that we need to deal with. 47, I think, is the average age expectancy of somebody who's sleeping rough. That's the way to tackle these problems, rather than criminalisation by the rather heavy-handed use of a very
heavy-handed. I mean, Rupa, many people will probably be surprised that the police can and do use these powers, fining homeless people £1,000. It's nonsensical, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's a punitive anachronism, and, you know, we don't need it. It's 200 years old nearly. I mean, we saw some good things happen in this pandemic. There was the Everyone In initiative by government to take people into hotels that were not being used for those purposes. I think 450 rough sleepers in Ealing were housed at the time, but that looks to have been a sort of temporary thing. And, you know, what we need is sustained. Again, like with London Transport, we keep going hand to mouth with these settlements. We need a proper, sustained, long-term solution to these things. But, yeah, getting rid of the Vagrancy Act would be part of it. And actually, one of my predecessors, he was Sir George Young, now Lord George Young. He did an article in the Times with Robert Jenrick, arguing that the fact that people can be criminalised means that they're scared to seek help. There's things like the Street Link initiative, where they can sort of put people in up for the night. But again, people are sort of terrified they'll have this £1,000 fine or whatever. So it just seems nonsensical. And I hope the government listens to sense.
Thank you. Now to the issue of prostitution in the capital. According to campaigners, financial hardship over the pandemic has led to growing numbers of women turning to prostitution and has forced sex workers to take greater risks and work longer hours to survive financially. Research by the English Collective of Prostitutes found that nearly 2/3 of sex workers were struggling to afford food. And there's concern that the cost of living crisis is already making matters worse. Well, I'm joined now by Nikki Adams, spokeswoman for the English Collective of Prostitutes. Nikki, welcome to you. Thanks very much for being with us. So tell us how the pandemic has impacted on sex workers.
Well, the situation was already quite bad before the pandemic in that the austerity cuts had really targeted women, and we saw that the UN Rapporteur on Poverty had said that there was a connection between that and women going into prostitution, into survival sex, as they call it, which is exchanging sex for basic essentials. And then in the pandemic, sex workers' income just fell off a cliff. I mean, people were literally left destitute. We had hundreds of women coming to us, and we were struggling to produce, to to give food vouchers and other kind of emergency help. We also saw a big increase in violence and stalking against women as soon as women started going back to work. And it's really, the situation since then has deteriorated even further. A lot of women tried to go on to universal credit. There were problems with that. Some were ticking over with the extra £20 a week. As soon as that cut came in, people again are literally not being able to afford food or heating. I mean, people say about the choice between eating and heating. For a lot of women, it's you can't afford either. And the most sex workers are mums. I mean, that is a fact that's not well known, but it's definitely true. And I think it really shows you what the problem is, because who's going into sex work is mothers who can't find jobs that will pay enough to pay childcare, and other people who are really, literally on the breadline.
So your organisation advocates for the decriminalisation of prostitution. Why? What impact would that have?
The first thing that would happen is that it would be safer for women to work, and it would also mean that it would be easier to get out of prostitution. It would be safer because the laws at the moment force you to work in isolation. If more than one woman is working from premises, it's brothel keeping. Hundreds of women are being prosecuted yearly for brothel keeping offences. It's also illegal to work on the street. But it would also mean that at the moment, as soon as you get a criminal record for prostitution, you're stuck in prostitution, usually for life. You try and go for another job, it's always there on your record, and it really is a major barrier. New Zealand did decriminalise in 2003. It got definite proof that it increases women's health and safety, and 90% of sex workers said that they were more able to report violence and had greater rights.
OK, so let's put those points to Bob. The sex trade has always existed, will always exist. Isn't it time to provide a duty of care to these women?
I think the fact that it has always existed and probably will always exist doesn't mean it's something I think that one would want any woman to feel the need ever to get into for a start. So I think we need to tackle the underlying causes first of why that happens. Second point, what hasn't been mentioned, of course, is the role of organised crime and trafficking in much of the sex trade. And that's the bit that I think is really dangerous. And so I wouldn't want to be moving down the road of decriminalisation, which I'm not 100% opposed to. It's worth looking at. But if you're going to do that, you first of all have to make sure that you're not actually opening the floodgates and making it easier for the traffickers, for the organised pimps, the people who coerce women. So you'd have to make sure that was done. If you're legalising it, you could actually be legalising their activities too, and that surely will be the last thing that we want. So let's keep an open mind. Let's look carefully at the evidence, because evidence from other countries does point in more than one way. But let's not make women actually more vulnerable from those who actually organise the sex trade, which very often isn't the minute.
Rupa, what's your view?
Well, it is the oldest profession in the world, is it not? I think maybe more research is needed to look into this. I know that the Home Affairs Select Committee under Keith Vaz, remember him? In 2016, I think they recommended going down this decriminalisation route and giving women employment rights. And I'm all for trade unions, but yeah, I just don't know enough about it. I think, yeah, you don't want to drive something illegal even more underground. I think if you went the other way, what they do in Nordic countries, it makes unsafe women even less safe.
OK.
I wouldn't want to go down that route, but I guess more research is needed.
Thank you. I just want to give Nikki the last word.
Well, first of all, the trafficking is a distraction. You have to tackle women's poverty, first of all. And it is really a distraction. I can see Bob shaking his head. It is. The fact is that there's an enormous amount of misinformation about trafficking. Trafficking has been pushed forward in relation to prostitution in a completely disproportionate way. The fact is that women are going into prostitution because they're desperate. And there is research, Rupa. The government did their own research. They found out that criminalisation was making it more dangerous.
Nikki, we are out of time. Thank you very much. That is all we have time for. My thanks to my guest, Nikki, and of course to Rupa and to Bob. We're not on air next week. We're off for the parliamentary recess, so we'll see you soon. Goodbye and take care.